Hello, my friends. My name is Darren Gerdes, and here are the four big stories for today. Well, Nigel Farage is doubling down. Nigel Farage is the British member of the former member of the European Parliament, I think, that was responsible for Brexit. He is running as a reform candidate in the UK now in the British Parliament. And he was just talking about how NATO was to blame for causing the war in Ukraine, which is a Russian talking point. And now he's adding more Russian talking points. President should rethink the goal of reclaiming all lost territory, says Reform UK leader in his latest remarks about the war. Nigel Farage has urged Volodymyr Zelensky to seek a peace deal with Russia. Otherwise, there will be no young men left in Ukraine. Again, standard talking point that you see if you read TASS or Pravda or RT. Farage made his remarks on the Ukraine war while speaking to journalists from the Times and Daily Mail on a trip to the Channel to highlight a number of small boat crossings. It came after another Reform UK politician, his name is Mullins, the candidate for Salisbury, was booed for telling local voters that Putin seemed very good. And so the Reform Party seems to be the most MAGA-like party in Britain. And correct me if I'm wrong, if you're British and you understand something that I don't understand about this. But going back to that idea that NATO is to blame, there's this fascinating article. I was going to do a whole thing about it. I may still do it, but it's saying, sorry, Farage, Putin is provoked by Ukrainian independence, not NATO. Now, I made the argument the other day that they couldn't have joined NATO since 2014, so saying in 2022 that that's why you're doing it is disingenuous. But there's another way that you can look at that disingenuous argument, and that is that when Sweden and Finland joined NATO, Putin has withdrawn troops from the Finnish border to use in Ukraine. If NATO was really a threat in a meaningful way, they wouldn't have withdrawn them from the border, but beefed up the border with Finland. Okay, speaking of NATO, the appointment of the new NATO Secretary General that just happened signals continued support for Ukraine. NATO approved the appointment of Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte as the alliance's next Secretary General, set to take office on October 1st and known for his pro-Ukrainian stance. And that's a good thing. I mean, if you're going to have some continuity, Rutte is going to be the guy that's going to bring that continuity forward. And he's going to have a hard time because NATO is really an alliance that he really has to work. It's almost like Eisenhower in World War II having to work with the Allies rather than an independent organization in and of itself. So he's diplomatic. He's been called the Trump whisperer. So maybe he can bring something useful to the table there. While we're at it, Kurt Volker is saying if Ukraine can't join NATO until the war ends, Putin will continue the war. Volker spoke to Euromaidan Press before the NATO summit as allies debate Ukraine's path toward membership without using an invitation. Questions emerge about signals being sent to Putin. So there's not only signals being sent to Ukraine, but to Putin simultaneously based on what they do or don't do. The former U.S. ambassador to NATO proposed immediate membership for Ukraine and a $500 billion Lend-Lease program to ensure uninterrupted support. Volker dismissed fears of Russian escalation, pointing to Moscow's inaction when Ukraine crossed supposed red lines. He states, quote, if they could escalate today, they already would. That's a great point. That is a really good point, urging the West to act more decisively in support of Ukraine. Now, somebody who gets that is somebody who's going to be the next Borrell, Joseph Borrell, the High Commissioner for European Diplomacy. This is Kaja Kallas. She's from Estonia, and she understands Russian negotiating tactics. Now, I've seen something very similar. I don't know if this is the same one that I saw about half a year ago of her saying this, or if she's just repeating herself. But listen to this. This is a brilliant assessment of where the Russians are.
Russia is making the demands. Russia is threatening. And now if we think that, oh, let's offer them something, then they actually get something that they didn't have before.
That's right. So if you say, well, let's just make peace and settle it where it is, then you're essentially giving the victimizer you're giving them benefit for having been a victimizer, and you're punishing the victim. That's what you ultimately wind up doing, but that's how Russia will negotiate.
I've quoted this foreign minister, Alexei Gromyko, Soviet time foreign minister, several times. said about the negotiation tactics of Soviet Union. Three things. First, demand the maximum. Do not ask, but demand something that has never been yours. Second,
they're asking for the entirety of Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, right? They're asking for all these property, even though they don't control all the way to the administrative border of that. They're demanding that this as a condition for peace. Now, remember, Trump's peace plan is, well, we're going to force Ukraine to the negotiating table, and this is a terrible peace plan, by saying, if you don't, we're going to withdraw our support, and force Russia to the table by saying, well, we're going to aid Ukraine if you don't do it. But Russia's precondition for negotiation is going to be all of the territory that they have supposedly conquered, which they haven't actually conquered, and but this is how they're going to do it, and they're going to present ultimatums.
Threaten. And third, do not give 1 inch in negotiations, because there will be always people in the West who will offer you something. And then in the end, you will have 1/3 or even 1/2 of something you didn't have before. So we have to keep that in mind all the time.
So I'm pleasantly surprised that she is going to be replacing Borrell as the High Commissioner for European Diplomacy, and that's a good sign. Okay, meanwhile, Solyov is saying things like this: I would wipe out Odessa, Mykolaiv, Kharkiv, Kyiv off the map. I would give citizens 3 days to leave those cities. 3 days after that, I would strike, because Crimea is being struck from Odessa and Mykolaiv. Belgorod is being struck from Kharkiv, and Kyiv is at the center where all the decisions are made. For anyone who still believes Russia is interested in any kind of negotiation, this is the kind of thing that he's saying. Now, again, I would go back to this, where Volker said if they could, they already would have done that. So he's kind of full of hot air, because if they could have done it, they would have already. Okay. Meanwhile, in Russia, take that, Washington. India's Modi coming to Russia for a breakthrough visit. Well, they're speculating that they're going to create some kind of military exchange. It's called Relos. Reportedly, the Russian Federation, and this is in Pravda, so you want to take it with a little grain of salt, but I'll show you in an Indian paper as well. The Russian Federation has approved the draft of the long-awaited Relos agreement. The agreement will enable the armed forces of both countries to use each other's military facilities. Well, that's going to amplify Russia's reach to be able to put them out in Indian ports and such. Based on Relos, partner countries would be able to gain easy access to each other's military installations, ports, air bases, with cost and fees calculated on an ongoing basis. The agreement stipulates maintenance of warships, military aircraft, and the development of military personnel of both countries during visits and joint exercises. So that would create projection for Russia, but India is also benefiting for that too. This is an Indian paper. Indian Navy ships will shortly get access to Russian ports as it approves long pending draft of mutual logistics agreement. So it's not like it's just Russia getting to be in Indian ports, but India would also get to be places that it's not currently as well. So both of them could win, and this is part of what Putin's trying to do, is create more of a, not Warsaw Pact, but a new alliance, at least if not an alliance, in fact, somewhere where they're able to project their force. Okay, last little bit. Also in Russia, trial of Wall Street Journal correspondent Evan Gershkovich will begin today in Yekaterinburg. He's accused of espionage. He could get 20 years in prison. I just looked just before shooting this, and there was no actual news update about that. Meanwhile, this is how Russians are processing and thinking about Ukraine. Not all Russians, but a sample from 1420. In 37 and 38, Stalin wanted to destroy Ukraine. He could have finished them off, this lady says. They should have blanked them, and they blanked adults, but they didn't touch kids. These kids grew up then and became Banderovites. Do you think that every Ukrainian person is a Banderite? Sure. See, Ukrainians were offered a Russian passport. They were invited to leave Ukraine, right? Some of them left, but those who stayed, those should have been blanked right away. They must be blanked, just like crawling snakes. They are pulled from Ukraine for their own good. They're given passports. They would have been given pensions and everything, but they turned their backs on us. I don't know. And that's where this lady is. And it's not just because she just happens to be some racist, but if she's imbibing media like Solioff and the thing that he talks about, and what we know is that the older you are, the more you're watching something like Solioff, yeah, there's a large portion of the Russian population that's going to feel and express those kind of sentiments. So don't look for a rise up revolution of the Russian people to topple Putin anytime soon. Okay, my friends, that's all that I have for today. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.